Hi guys, welcome to a vlog on Pit Lane Parlay. Thank you so much for joining. This is Matt Hickey with David Leiting Jr. and Frenchy, Michael Goodier. We are going to be doing a kind of like impromptu debate topic, and we'll be doing a couple of these. If you guys have any suggestions on stuff you'd like to see us debate, please drop a comment or tweet to us at Pit Lane Parlay. We'd love to keep doing these. The topic tonight was Team Penske getting bumped from the 1995 Indy 500 good for the sport? So we have one of these guys kind of taking the, yes, it was sort of good for the sport, and one of these guys taking the, it was not necessarily good for the sport. And so kind of gave these guys minimal information or direction on what to do, but they're both very smart when it comes to IndyCar and know about this topic. So we're going to kind of roll with it. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we really appreciate your support. So we will start with, yes, Team Penske getting bumped from the Indy 500 in 1995 was sort of pretty good for the sport, and that is Frenchy. So Frenchy, kind of take it away and tell us where you're coming from with taking the pro stance in this one.
Yeah, so I think I've got basically 3 or so bullet points why I think it was a good thing overall for the sport. And I'm not going to argue that it was good for Team Penske or any of their drivers. Obviously, if you look at them individually, it's not a good thing to miss the 500. But my first point or argument, I guess, would be that Penske was dominant, right? They're always kind of known as this dominant team with the Indy 500. Starting in 1979 with CART, they won 9 of the 16 Indy 500s going up to 1995. So you're talking about ridiculous dominance at the Speedway. And I just personally think, we look at Mercedes today and F1, it just kind of gets old seeing one team dominate over and over again. So that's why I think it's good for the sport, number one, that they missed the 500, because obviously they can't just kind of claim another year and somebody else gets to do it. The second reason is that I just think it was cool that we got a famous name to win, right? Obviously, I think Penske, if they're in the race, they're competitive. We've seen that they're usually up at the front with at least one of their cars. So in 1995, we got to see Jacques Villeneuve win the Indy 500, which, that's a famous name across motorsports, kind of brings interest, I would imagine, from the Formula One world. Wow, this guy won the Indy 500, and I think it kind of lent him some more credibility, led him over to Formula One later on, which was, to me, kind of a gift. He was fun to watch. He had a really interesting personality, and I don't think his talent lasted him long enough, or that he got in the right equipment long enough, but I think that was another reason why Penske missing in 1995 was good. And then the last reason is that I think just seeing a team that's that dominant miss the race shows you and kind of adds to the prestige of the event, that it can go both ways, right? That the event itself is bigger than any team. You have this group who's just kind of mastered it over the years. For the decade of the 80s, they won, definitely most of the events there. But you go from 1994, where they were super dominant with Beast and kind of surprised the world, to the really dramatic not making the race in 95. And I just think that kind of adds to the mystique of the Indy 500 and makes, part of what it is.
All right. Solid opening argument. We're going to turn it over to David now for the not necessarily positive take on why it was good for the Indy 500 and Indy
So I didn't come as prepared as our friend Frenchy here with his 3 prepared bullet points, but I guess we probably shouldn't be surprised about that. For me, there was really one driving factor on why I think Penske getting bumped in 95 was pretty detrimental to IndyCar at large. And it primarily has to do with, if you look at just 95 in that vacuum, it was such a tumultuous time for American open wheel racing. And one of the, Frenchy kind of touched on it there at the end, one of the reasons for that was Penske dominated in 94. Clearly there was already a divide occurring between the Speedway and the current way the CART series sat. And I think Penske's domination in 94 only made that worse. And I think the regulations then put in place to slow them down a little bit, which I think I don't think you can say ultimately is why they missed the field in 95, because if you're a motorsports giant like Penske, you should be able to recover. But I think it certainly played a factor into that. And then to actually go on and ultimately miss the race, I think it just drove the stake, even further into the impending split. Again, I think if you look at any other year other than 95, I could get on board with, hey, this is good for the sport. But I think that was kind of the final nail in the coffin from Roger Penske's standpoint of, a little bit of disappointment and, quite frankly, probably a little bit of anger towards where the sport was headed, specifically in regards to the 500. And I know, Frenchy just touched on it. It's cool because it is great to see a big name fall. But ultimately, when you have a name like, Fittipaldi, Unser that are going to miss the race, those are names that are synonymous with winning at the Speedway, and to not have them in the race that year. Again, you can say the 90s were the heyday, but, people tune in to see names like that. People buy tickets to see names like that. But again, I think ultimately my biggest point is I think just the timing of it was extremely unfortunate, and didn't do anything positive for helping the two sides come together in 96, which ultimately they did not. And I'm sure this was a factor in that.
Okay, so we're at the point now where you guys can jump in if you'd wish. I got some kind of guiding questions here, but if you guys got a point you want to make or counter argue, feel free to just jump in. So I'm going to start with Frenchys. So Leiting's point there, where he talks about people paying tickets to come watch Mo and come watch Little Al, and I am pretty confident in saying that my dad was one of those people. He has the 94 or the 95 ticket with Little Al on from 94. That ticket is his bookmark that he uses for every book he has. It's laminated and everything. So he was obviously very bummed that Little Al got bumped when he went 95. So what is your kind of take on that factor of bumping being bad if a big name that you wanted to go pay money to see ends up not being in the field?
Yeah, and I think that's fair, but I'd hope that people who support one driver are enough of a fan of the sport that they're still going to go watch the race, right? Even if your favorite driver doesn't make it. Look at the year where Hinch got bumped. I mean, I don't think that all the Hinch fans just went home and threw their tickets in the trash. I would hope not. I mean, I don't think the attendance was down. So I think that you can still see, if your favorite driver is not in the race or maybe crashes out early, you can be disappointed, right? That's part of the drama of the sport. It's unpredictable. It's exciting. You don't want to see someone go home before race day, especially if they're the guy you cheer for or the girl you cheer for. But,
and I get that, but I think the way I see it is, so Hinch is a big name in IndyCar racing. Hardcore IndyCar fans know Hinch. Unfortunately, I don't know if that's a household name within all of motorsports, even worldwide motorsports. So I don't think you're going to turn away the diehard fans. But when a name like Unser, who the casual race fan hears about once a year, isn't in the race, it's maybe this isn't as relevant. Or when Alonso missed the race in 2019. Did I think that was awesome to showcase just how difficult it is to make the field? Yes. But do I think that ultimately probably hindered, viewership? Also, yes, because there's a certain audience that's only going to tune in if their guy or gal is in the race. Again, for us diehards, it's awesome. But for the casual fans that only tune in once a year or maybe twice a year, maybe not as beneficial.
I think I might have two things to say back to that, because you guys are making good arguments, and I feel like I agree with you, but I also have my own sort of view on it, that I think Alonso getting bumped, even if it didn't increase attendance or people tuning into the race, made it a bigger story, like a news headline, that it went out further into the world. Whoa, wait, Alonso got bumped? I feel like more
especially
people,
by Juncos.
Right. Exactly. That maybe more people didn't tune into the race, especially in Spain or the F1 audience, to see Alonso race. But the fact that he got bumped, I think, made it front page news, headline everywhere, which I think was probably the same in 95 with Penske getting bumped. And then the second thing I would say is just that with Alonso getting bumped, same thing with Penske missing the race in 95. I think it just adds credibility to the Indy 500 and how hard it is. You can be this good over time, prove yourself in so many other disciplines, but sometimes it's just not going to go your way. And especially with at least the 500, that's, I think, part of what makes winning it so cool.
Okay, so the next thing I wanted to address was something that Leiting had said. And so that is about, we talk about the Beast in 1994. We talk about some of the divides between the engine manufacturers, the team owners, and then the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and Tony George that were leading up to 95. Would it be fair to say that despite Penske being bumped in 1995, that a lot of the stuff leading up to the split had nothing to do with that bump day?
Yes, I think that's fair because I think a lot of Tony George's gripes with the direction of the series obviously were coming to the surface much earlier than that. But I think that whole storyline of post 94 leading into 95 kind of capture that in a nutshell. And that was more my point, is it really brought to light the direction the sport was going to be going. And I think you could say 30 years later, not quite 30 years later, almost 30 years later, we're still feeling that ripple effect. I mean, one of the arguments, and again, this is like, the butterfly effect. There's a million things that could have happened one way or another. But one of the areas that I think benefits IndyCar from a competition standpoint is that tighter rules, spec racing. But ultimately, if you look at some of the arguments over the last 20 years, the more they've gone in that direction, the more it's kind of pushed out that, competitive spirit amongst, OEMs, as well as, the inventiveness that made the 500 really what it is. And I think that 95 was the first kind of domino to fall in the next quarter century of dominoes that have fallen since then.
Right, and you could also make the argument too that the IRL was built for more parity and for more, little teams winning, which was quite the opposite of the 1994 Indy 500. So there was definitely a fabric there. So, Frenchy, can you see that point too, that the 9500 might have been the nail in the coffin for Penske and ultimately, therefore, could be interpreted as bad for the sport?
Oh, yeah. And I think that's the biggest chink in the armor of my argument, completely, is the fact that it comes within this context of this fractious relationship between Tony George and Roger Penske, and sort of this, if I could tie my argument up in a little bow, what would happen is the split would never have happened, right? And we would have had the 96 500 with Penske in it, where they would have gotten to try to get back in the race, instead of waiting back until 2000, 2001, whatever, when they came back. Because that would have been the perfect story arc of 94, we make it, we dominate. 95, oh crap, we didn't make it, but 96, we get to come back. However, we didn't get to see that, and I think that it had a lot of effects, like you guys both mentioned.
Ultimately, again, when Matt initially posed this question to us the other day, I really looked at it in 95 only. I didn't look at it as Penske getting bumped from any 500. So if we were to say, hey, if Will Power gets bumped from the 2021 Indy 500, was that good for the sport? Or Alonso gets bumped in 2019, is that good for the sport? I'm definitely more apt to say yes in those years, because I don't think the domino effect, the butterfly effect, is as extensive.
So that was going to be one of my next questions. So I'll just jump to that one then. So let's say 2022 rolls around, Joseph Newgarden gets bumped. Are you guys thinking that, given the economic nature of the racing world and given the popularity of the Indy 500, and with a lot of diehard IndyCar fans, or even the common fan now, Joseph Newgarden's a pretty familiar face and name, do we think that would be good for the sport, or like a Will Power getting bumped from 2021? Are we going to be changing our opinions then, given the landscape of where we are now? Even if, spec era and sponsors and COVID-19 world, is that still good for the sport if someone like Joseph gets bumped next year? We can start with Frenchy.
I think it's hard to take it out of the context of the 80s and 90s when Penske was so dominant. I think if Penske had just won the last 5 Indy 500s or something, or if they had won a bunch, in of decade, and it was almost getting like, okay, we can expect them to win, then I do think it would be good for the sport to see a change up, right? To see like basically this changing of the guards. We just saw it with the 2021 IndyCar season we saw a lot of new winners, like this young youth movement or whatever that everyone was all excited about. It's kind of interesting to see people come up and, change the face of who's winning, right? Who's standing on the podium. But I think within what we're talking about, the spec era, with it being so unpredictable and not really, just one team winning over and over again, I don't know if it would be good for the sport.
Yeah, I go back and forth. I've always been of the opinion that I think bumping is one of the things that makes Indy and what makes it so special. And I've always been in favor of let's keep bumping around, because I think qualifying weekend, but now it's only a weekend, is probably my favorite weekend of the year in the racing calendar, even more so than race day, because there's just the pendulum goes back and forth so much, and bumping is one of the things that makes that special. And I think the drama of having somebody like Joseph Newgarden potentially miss the field or ultimately missing the field is huge in the motorsports world. Again, like our atmosphere of fans is going to think that's the biggest story since Hinch missed the field. But go back to, the fans that come out to the race on, Memorial Day weekend, that's the only race they really tune into. And all of a sudden, one of the guys that they're used to seeing isn't at the race. If they're already at the race, obviously it doesn't really impact anything. But I still wonder how that impacts the casual viewer. But ultimately, I'd say within the motorsports world, it's a good thing.
It's kind of like you guys kind of like switched just for that topic only. I think that's kind of interesting and offers an insight. I think it shows how flexible you guys are too with your opinions and whatnot. So that's pretty cool. I just had one more counter argument here, and then if we had any final thoughts or whatever. Right now I'm honestly like kind of split. I see both sides, and I might have to let the opinions of others sway my decision here on who I'd side with. So the one last argument I had, and I'm not sure how extensive Leiting's knowledge is in the Formula One area, but it's something the Frenchys said, that with Penske being bumped for the 95 Indy 500, it allowed a fresh face and a famous name like Jacques Villeneuve to win, thus helping him springboard potentially. Maybe it was just that, or maybe the deal was already signed. I don't know the backstory there, but I'm sure that winning the Indy 500 definitely helped, as did winning the championship in 95 to get to Formula One. Could one argue that Jacques Villeneuve winning the championship in the Indy 500 and thus going to Formula One and IndyCar losing a famous name like Villeneuve was actually bad for the sport?
I've never thought about it that way. I don't know. What do you think, Frenchy?
I think you can look at it as a parallel, because we saw the same thing happen with Juan Pablo Montoya,
I literally was
right?
just thinking of Montoya, and not that Bourdais was as big of a name, but also Bourdais.
Yeah. So, and we're looking at it right now with this whole Colton Herta thing in the news. I think it is not bad for the sport, right? If we're talking about motorsports, I think it's good, because you get crossover fans and you get, somebody trying a series that they're not necessarily familiar with, and you get to, prove maybe IndyCar's worth or talent to European racing fans. But I think for IndyCar fans, losing Jacques Villeneuve was probably one of what I think, along with the split, obviously, which is huge, one of those last kind of, as you put it earlier, nails in the coffin to like the heyday of kart. We think about when Mansell came over and that crossover that was just good for the sport in general. Losing a big name like Montoya later in 2001, and then, Villeneuve in 1996. He left he was Damon Hill's teammate in 96. I don't think it was, good for IndyCar or kart.
Yeah, I agree with Frenchy on that one too. And I know things happen, but it almost made the Indy 500 look as if it was just simply a springboard to Formula One. Like, this is a stepping stone on my way to a, world title chase. across the pond. Which again, like you said, is good for motorsport, but I don't think it's good for the sport of IndyCar. The only positive I can spin on that is when a guy is successful, when they make that jump, it says to the rest of the motorsports world, hey, we're pretty damn talented here too. We may not be the biggest teams and the biggest names in the racing world, but we can hang it on the outside with the best of them.
Fair enough. I think that's all I have for counter arguments. Do you guys have any final thoughts or any last sways for the public opinion or anything?
No, I just don't want people to think that I hate Penske, because I don't. I think Penske's a great team.
It's going to be the title of the vlog here. Frenchy hates Penske.
No, I just think overall, if you think about it in context, it's hard to, I think, not see the drama, right? And something that we're still talking about this much after this much time of what happened. It was one of those big events in, I think, motorsport that people outside the sport even know. And that's why I think it was ultimately good for the sport, even if it was bad for fans. And I'm trying to separate myself from being a fan to think about, okay, some things are good for the sport that maybe aren't really good for the diehards.
In a weird way, I don't really see this as an argument, but it's one of those things. In a weird way, it almost hurts the sport today, because people like us say, oh man, back in 95, it was crazy. There were so many cars running for the race, and it was, the best team didn't even make the show. And it's like, you can't even fathom that nowadays. And it's almost kind of like old man on lawn yelling at cloud, like, oh, the good old days of IndyCar were so much better. So in a way, it also hurts us in that aspect too, because it's like, what? There hasn't been some good shit to talk about in the last 25 years, and you got to talk about this team getting bumped in 95. But still, it just an incredible story in motorsports, no matter how you look at it.
Couldn't go one vlog without mentioning host Mike, because he is the old man yelling at the clouds. All right, I think that's how we can end this one. This was very good. You guys did a great job. So congrats to you guys on, I think, doing a great job of kind of covering your area of the argument, even if, like Leiting said, depending on the situation, it was bad for the sport, but not necessarily would be bad nowadays. So you guys did a good job of both covering your angles. We hopefully will do a couple more of these, because I think this worked pretty well, and we'll try to drum up some more topics to debate. If you guys have any topics for us, again, just let us know on social media at Pit Lane Parlay or in the comment section. But we'll try to come up with a couple more. So guys, thanks for joining, and thanks for watching, and we hope to see you guys at the track soon.